Chapter 4, Good Gangs. August, September 1996. The summer Mondo turned 15, the politicians announced that Salinas was at last recovering from its peak years of drive-bys and murders tied to gangs, cheap guns, and the crack trade. A couple years earlier, someone in Washington decided the Justice Department had better do something, so the DOJ gave the Salinas cops their first anti-gang grant, $1 million. The gang unit was formed and the crime rate dropped. And then the rumors started. Summer from the White House was coming to little old Salinas, and like a stream murmuring down every alley and percolating through every field, the rumor gained momentum until it became a river of speculation. Mondo was out of juvie and staying yet at another group home when these stories circulated. He could not have cared less. All it meant was more cops on the street. But others in Salinas were entranced when on a foggy August morning, the President of the United States, Bill Clinton, appeared in front of the courthouse like Moses on the mountain. His entourage included Leon Pineda, a local who had become Clinton's chief of staff. Pineda accompanied the president on the drive from San Jose, and the closer they got to Salinas, Clinton noticed the happier Pineda became. He was like a kid with a new toy when we drove into town, the president said. The crowd responded with knowing laughter because few standing there didn't also love the place with a sometimes irrational affection. And he began to talk about you, the president told the people of Salinas, and about his life as a congressman, and about his friendships here, and about what kind of community this was. And as we walked down the streets and people waved to us, this sort of flood of memories came out. It was classic Clinton, thrusting his hands deep into town folks' hearts before drilling into the meat of the matter. He was leading them into his raise up the people rapture. Clinton said for 4 years in a row, the crime rate had come down in America, but it went up among teenagers. It seems inconceivable, he said in a somber tone, but he quickly turned hopeful. And Salinas said, "We're going to rescue every single one of our children." The audience rewarded all this flattery with applause, and Clinton rewarded them back with the really good news that for the first time in 7 years, violent juvenile crime arrests in Salinas had come down, with juvenile murder arrests dropping 15%. Don't forget that not so long ago, this community was literally invaded by an army of 20 gangs with 1,500 members, he said, and Salinas, everyone knew, was not alone. Just up the highway in San Jose, the past few years had been marked by an especially bloody period in the Nuestra Familia's history. Prosecutors could barely keep track of the NF-sanctioned killings. A gang leader's girlfriend was whacked because she threatened to expose his crimes. A man was gunned down in front of an elementary school. A boxer who moonlighted as a drug dealer was shot between the eyes after refusing to pay a cut of his drug sales. And the list went on. Avoiding the death penalty after 21 Nuestra Familia leaders and colleagues were indicted in Santa Clara County, 2 regiment leaders admitted to ordering no less than 6 murders. 5 months before Clinton's appearance in Salinas, the massive state trial was finally underway, 4 years after the indictments came down, only to be abruptly postponed again after a high-ranking leader flipped and agreed to testify. That was Chente, Vincent Arroyo. Standing in the blood-soaked heartland of this war, the president was compassionate. A lot of kids wound up in those gangs just because they didn't have any other thing to belong to. You think about it. We all want to belong to a gang. We just want to be in good gangs, like churches and synagogues and sports teams, he said. For a mystical instant, Clinton had turned the city's despised thugs into lost children deserving of love. He reminded folks that kids join gangs because none of us are destined to live isolated lives. He ended with the challenge shouted to all the nation. And what I want to ask everyone in America is, if your community hasn't done what they have done in Salinas, what's your excuse? The roars rolled throughout Old Town as if for a second everyone truly believed that they had this gang licked. Then the entourage blew away on the cusp of the valley's pitiless afternoon winds, making it townsfolk wonder. Then the entourage blew away on the cusp of the valley's pitiless afternoon winds, making townsfolk wonder if it had ever been there at all. A few weeks later, the fall weather turned soft and lazy, and the crew decided to get drunk. Sick of being trapped under someone else's rules, Mondo had once more run away from his group home and was crashing with his best friend. Roy was in his 20s, but always looked out for Mondo as if he were a little brother. If Mondo needed money, Roy gave it to him. If he hadn't eaten, Roy fed him. Long ago, Mondo found he preferred to spend time with older guys. His dad was more friend than parent, letting him hang out with the adults. Big Mondo was only a 16-year-old kid when his son was born, so the little Mondo, the older homeboys like Roy, were just more fathers and big brothers filling in. Roy suggested their group of friends pick up a keg he left with the homeboy in the Los Padres apartments. Mondo went along despite the warrant on his head. He left Roy's without a gun and didn't pause to wonder if he'd regret the decision. The homeboy with the keg wasn't home, so they kicked it at another homeboy's apartment. Mondo smoked weed with a couple of them. Somebody went out for ice, and then it was dark, and they were high as hell when Roy said it was time to check on the keg. As they passed the carport, Roy pulled out a gun. A dozen or so border brothers were huddled in the corner gambling or drinking or something. Mondo was so stoned, he wasn't sure. Roy told them to hand over their money. Another easy job. Show a gun, take the cash, and walk away. No big thing. No one figured they'd be packing. At first, Mondo couldn't grasp what was happening. There was a brief flash of disbelief as one of the Mexicans pulled out a cohete and blasted away. Ducking and running, Roy and the border brother fired into a blur of chaos. Shots zinging, shell casings popping into the air and falling, people running. It all went bad. People screamed from the apartments. Mondo told himself he should run, but instead he picked up a fallen gun and shot it. Then he saw that Roy was down. He tried to pull his friend out of the way as bullets flew, and with one arm supporting Roy, he fired back again. The border brothers scattered. "I'm shot," Roy said when it went quiet. Mondo thought he was just playing, messing with him. The homeboys lifted up his shirt, and sure enough, he'd been hit. Mondo thought it looked funny. Not funny, but weird, because he could see his friend had a bullet hole in him and no blood was coming out. Someone called for an ambulance. They waited and waited, and nothing. They called again. Mondo held his friend close. "Just get this message to my mom. Tell her I love her," Roy whispered. The last thing Mondo remembered his homeboy saying was that he didn't think he was going to make it. Then the mournful wail of sirens. "No," Mondo said, "you're going to be all right. You know you're going to be all right." The homeboy said they'd take care of Roy, get him to a doctor. Mondo didn't want to leave. His father taught him to never ever leave. But everyone kept saying he had to get the fuck out of there, that he wouldn't do Roy any good being in jail. They said to run, so he ran, and he took Roy's gun with him. Mondo didn't dare call anyone. He had nowhere to go but home, and he spent the night in his room, afraid of what happened, after Roy was right when he said he was going to die. He told himself he'd seen death before. When he was 13, he used to spar with this kid at the Breadbox Rec Center ring. In the mornings, his mom would drop him off at the kid's house, and they'd smoke weed and walk to school together. Sometimes they'd take girls over to his friend's house after school and kick it pretty tough. But the friend ended up in a fight one day, got himself killed by a fucking sureño. Mondo just figured this happens. Whenever someone died, he'd look to his dad or uncles and see that they never cried, so he never did either. Unable to sleep, he woke his mother at dawn. "I need to go to the store," he said. She gave him some quarters. The newspapers were fresh in the racks, and Mondo learned from the Salinas Californian that Roy didn't make it. One of the border brothers also died. This time he cried. As much as he wanted to hold back, he couldn't. He found out later that Roy and the homies had robbed the paisas a few times before, which was why they were ready with the gun. Mondo hid in his room and listened to all the music that reminded him of Roy, his mind tripping out on the crazy times they'd been through. The truth just couldn't sink in. He was never going to see his best friend again. Roy carried the cohete everywhere, treated it like he was his baby. The day the news of Roy's death broke, everyone told Mondo that Roy's mom wanted the gun because she knew how much it meant to her son. Friends were holding a car wash to raise money for the funeral. Mondo convinced a few homeboys to drive him to Roy's mother so he could return the gun and recite his friend's last words. It was an honor and a duty to tell a mother her son said he loved her before he left this world. He did not know that his best friend's family blamed him for Roy's death, that they and others believed one of his shots had accidentally killed Roy. He wouldn't know this until years later because he never made it to the house to speak his piece. The gang unit cops had the car wash under surveillance. They pulled the car over with weapons drawn and didn't seem surprised when they found little Mondo with the weapon in his pants. They cuffed him, read him his rights, and soon they informed him he was going down for a double homicide.